Look up for a moment, not with your eyes, but with that quiet part of you that still remembers what the world felt like before electricity, before cities, before names were carved into borders. Imagine you are standing in the open somewhere far from Noisa Desert at night. A mountain ridge, a coastline untouched since the first tide. The sky above you is impossibly wide, too wide, the kind of wide that makes you feel small in a way no philosophy class ever could. And in that vastness, as the stars settle into their ancient positions, you sense a presence. Not metaphorically, not poetically, but as a simple, physical truth. Something is watching back. That sensation, quiet, electric, irrational yet undeniable, has followed humanity longer than language itself. And what most people never realize is that the oldest memories our species ever produced, long before writing or civilization, begin in this exact place. Under the night sky, staring upward, waiting. Not for gods with thunderbolts. Not for sun deities riding chariots, but for beings real, physical, tangible who came down, walked among people who had no words for what they were seeing, taught them things no hunter-gatherer society should logically know, and then vanished. It is the single oldest global memory in human history. Every inhabited continent preserved it. Every ancestral lineage told it. And every tradition, no matter how isolated, describes the same faces, the same gestures, the same descent from the sky, as if a million families across time were all trying to retell a story too enormous to fully grasp. The twist is that they weren't exaggerating. They weren't writing mythopoetic allegories or cosmic metaphors. They were giving us the first eyewitness testimonies humanity ever recorded. And here is where the strange quiet of the night shifts, because the deeper you look into these stories, the more they begin to align. Not symbolically, not metaphorically, but with a level of precision that makes coincidence collapse under its own weight. You start to see it everywhere. A people in the Sahara paint towering figures with spherical helmets when the desert was still green. Thousands of kilometers away in Europe, others carve the same shapes into rock. Across the Pacific and Australia, artists with no contact with Africa or Europe create mouthless beings with radiating halos that mirror the same proportions. In the Americas, high on cliffs or deep inside caves, ancient painters describe beings descending in luminous rings, leaving behind knowledge that reshaped entire cultures. Different names, different artistic styles, same visitors. You realize quickly that this is not the story of one culture's imagination. It is not even the story of multiple cultures independently inventing a similar idea. It is the story of memory. A memory so old it survived the younger Dryas, the comet impacts, the megafaunal extinctions, the floods that erased coastlines, the near collapse of humanity into a genetic bottleneck. A memory carried by survivors who emerged into a ruined world and told their children to remember the ones who helped them. A memory carved into stone so future generations would not forget. And yet we did. We folded these accounts into mythology because we needed them to be safe. We needed them to be metaphors. Because the alternative that they were real was too destabilizing, too large, too uncontained. But the rocks did not forget. The mathematics did not forget. The alignments in megaliths pointing to star positions from 12,000 years ago did not forget. And when you see it all together, when the global pattern finally snaps into focus, you understand why so many ancient cultures insisted the same thing. The sky was not empty. Tonight, you and I begin following the trail back to the people who left that imprint. The visitors who arrived long before history began, long before there were kings, borders, or priests to rewrite the story. The beings whose teachings seeded agriculture, astronomy, writing, and architecture in places thousands of kilometers apart. The ones who said they would return, though nobody ever agreed on when. Before we step into their world, consider this. Our species has existed for roughly 300,000 years. Agriculture is only 12,000 years old. Writing, and scattered across the rubble of that forgotten age, are whisper strongs, carvings, rituals of 8 distinct groups of visitors who appeared at crucial moments, nudged humanity forward, and disappeared before the New World fully understood what it had inherited. Their names vary by continent. Their forms vary by artistic memory. But the pattern is unmistakable. They arrived during chaos. They lifted humanity from the brink. They gave knowledge far beyond the capacity of the cultures receiving it. They departed with a promise or a warning that they would one day return. Tonight we begin tracing them one by one, following the evidence across deserts, jungles, temples, star charts, and myths that refuse to die. But this is not just an archaeological journey. It is a journey into the oldest layer of our collective memory, the layer that predates civilization by tens of thousands of years, the layer that asks a question far more unsettling than were we alone. The real question, the one ancient cultures tried to leave for us in stone, is this. What were we before they came, and who did we become because they did? The sky above you has not changed. The same stars watch you now as they watched the people who first carved strange faces into rock. And if those early witnesses were telling the truth, if even a fraction of their accounts are literal rather than symbolic, then the night sky is not an expanse of silence. It is a memory waiting to be acknowledged. It is time to step into it. Walk with me now into a world without calendars, without kings, without anything that resembles what we call civilization. A world where the only archive humanity possessed was stone. Before stories were written, before myths were shaped by priests and poets, the first humans recorded what mattered to them most by pressing pigment into rock. And when you step into those ancient shelters, places untouched for tens of thousands of years, you discover something that should not exist. The same visitors, drawn the same way, across continents that never met. The story begins in the Sahara, though not the desert you know today. 12,000 years ago, it was a green world, rivers, trees, herds moving through open savannas. In this lush valley at Tassili-Najor, the earliest artists stood before towering walls of sandstone and painted beings, so strange that early explorers struggled to describe them. They called them lestites, rounds, the round heads. But heads is not quite right. These figures rise as much as 6 meters tall, bodies tapering into smooth, cylindrical limbs, faces replaced by perfect spheres with no eyes, no mouths, just featureless helmets ringed by shadows that glow like halos. Beside them, humans are drawn tiny, fragile, almost symbolic, as if the painters wanted scale itself to tell the story. Some round heads float above the ground in translucent bubbles. Some have tubes running from their helmets down their backs. Some extend long, jointless arms toward the smaller humans, in gestures that look less like threat and more like instruction. You can stand in front of these walls for hours, but the images do not become less uncanny, they become more precise. What makes this even more unsettling is how far the pattern spreads. Travel north into Europe, to Italy's Val Camonica, where more than 140,000 carvings cover the mountainsides. Among the hunters, deer, and ceremonial scenes are figures with rectangular helmets, straight-edged halos, and rays emanating from their heads like controlled bursts of energy. One of them, nicknamed the astronaut of Val Camonica, stands rigid inside what looks like a suit of panels, with a rounded shell enclosing the head and tubes running down the torso. Archaeologists catalog it as ritual attire, but rituals rarely require pressure suits, and they never require helmets so sealed that even the mouth disappears. Cross halfway around the world to Australia's Kimberley region, and the air itself feels older. In the red rock shelters carved by millennia of rain, the Wandjina stare down from the ceiling with enormous black oval eyes, pale faces, and halos that ripple outward like electromagnetic fields frozen in pigment. Their bodies fade into mist as if they are made of cloud more than flesh. And here, the artist did something attention-grabbing. They removed the mouth entirely. For tens of thousands of years, Aboriginal elders have repainted these beings at the start of each wet season. They say the Wandjina brought rain when the world was new. They shaped rivers with their hands, carved mountains with their feet, and taught the first laws. When their work was finished, they pressed their bodies into the rock, leaving their images behind as living beings who watch, warn, and remember. A Wandjina painting that is not maintained is believed to cause drought. A Wandjina painting that is touched improperly is said to call lightning down from the sky. But the truly astonishing detail is this. Carbon dating of charcoal sealed beneath the oldest layers places the Wandjina at least 20,000 years old. Some researchers push that date back to 40,000, or even 50,000. Years older than the end of the last ice age, older than agriculture, older than any known civilization. And yet the same exact facial proportions and halos appear across hundreds of kilometers. No empire linked these sites, no trade networks, yet the style remained identical for tens of millennia. Now step across the Pacific, into the jungles of Brazil, where the Pedra do Inga displays humanoid forms with elongated skulls and almond-shaped eyes. In Colombia's Quiribicate, cliff faces stretch for kilometers, covered by tens of thousands of figures, the same oversized heads, the same halos, the same beings standing inside, ringed enclosures that look eerily like force fields or descent vehicles. Many of these paintings were unknown to the outside world until just a decade ago, sealed in forests so remote that even satellites struggled to find them. In Namibia's Brandberg Mountains, a tall figure known misleadingly as the White Lady wears a fitted suit, pale against the red stone, with a dark visor covering the eyes. In South Africa, thin, elongated forms radiate shimmering lines that shamans today say represent power, but those lines also resemble heat, distortion, or energy fields. In Tanzania's Kondoa region, beings with antenna-like protrusions stand over humans in poses that can only be interpreted as either greeting or command. It is at this point in the journey that the weight of the pattern becomes too heavy to ignore. The problem is not that one site depicts unusual figures, the problem is that they all do. Across oceans, across climates, across timelines separated by tens of thousands of years, early humans described the same visitors with engineering-level consistency. No mouths, oversized black eyes or dark visors, seamless suits, helmets enclosing the head, tubes or cables connected to backpacks, beams or rings of light encircling the body, levitation or descent in glowing bubbles. Mainstream archaeology calls these stylized shamans. It calls the halos symbolic radiance and the helmets masks for rituals. Yet no shamanic tradition on Earth uses sealed helmets with reinforced joints. No myth cycle independently invents a pressure suit. And no symbolic ritual requires antennae, oxygen tubes, or floating descent chambers. The simplest explanation is also the one nobody wants to say aloud. The artists drew what they saw, and what they saw didn't look like human beings. This is the part where a quiet realization begins to settle in. These early rock artists were not trying to impress us. They were not creating religion, and they were not inventing metaphors. They were documenting something that had reshaped their world, something they wanted their children, and their children's children, to remember long after memory itself eroded. When you step back from the walls and let the images speak, the message becomes clear. Something descended, something walked among them, something taught them, watched them, stood above them literally and figuratively. And humanity's first instinct was to record, not worship. These walls are not myths. They are warnings, quiet ones, carved in the only language the Ice Age could trust to survive. And the deeper we travel into these memories, the more the stone begins to speak. If the rock walls were humanity's first silent witnesses, then the Hopi are the first storytellers who kept the memory alive with words instead of pigment. Their mesas rise from the Arizona desert like islands of time, places where history is not divided into centuries but into worlds each, world ending, not with metaphor but with catastrophe. And inside those stories sits one of the most unsettling threads in the global pattern. The Ant People, beings who lived beneath the earth, emerged when the sky tore open, and preserved humanity when everything else collapsed. To understand their story, you must first stand in the silence of the mesas at dusk. The air thins, shadows lengthen, and the walls of the ancient villages glow red as if holding the last breath of the sun. It is here, the elders say, that the first people once looked upward and saw the sky shimmering not with stars, but with signs. The world was ending, not gradually, not symbolically, but violently. Fire first, then water. This is the part that becomes difficult to treat as myth. Hopi tradition teaches that the previous world, the third world, was destroyed by fire that fell from above. Not fire from torches, not fire from volcanoes, but something that roared across the sky and made the air itself burn. The survivors were few, and they were saved only because the Ant People opened the earth. Imagine the scene as described. Long passages carved like the tunnels of insects, spiraling downward into chambers lit by a soft glow. There, pale, thin beings, with enormous eyes tended to the humans who had been allowed to enter. They gave them tiny portions of food, seeds, roots, preserved materials because in the darkness below, one learned to ration. They taught them how to store water, how to preserve grains, how to survive without sunlight. And when the fires above had finished their work, the Ant People led humanity back to the surface. But the world was not done ending. The fourth world, the world before ours, ended in water. Endless rain, roaring floods, oceans swallowing coastlines. Again the survivors retreated underground. Again the Ant People guided them. And again, when the waters receded, they brought humans up to begin again. You can dismiss this as symbolism if you choose. Many do. But the earth under the Hopi mesas tells another story. The Younger Dryas, a sudden, catastrophic freeze beginning around 12,800 years ago, was likely triggered by an airburst from a comet over North America. The heat from that impact would have ignited forests across the continent. The ash trapped in ice core speaks of global fires, temperatures spiking in an instant. Fire from the sky? Exactly when the Hopi say the third world ended. When the cold withdrew thousands of years later, the planet warmed so fast it fractured geological timelines. Meltwater pulses drove sea levels upward over 120 meters of ocean rising, swallowing tens of millions of square kilometers of coastline. Whatever lived on those now submerged lands, villages, trade routes, perhaps civilizations disappeared with them. A global flood. Exactly when the Hopi say the fourth world ended. But the alignment goes deeper. DNA evidence shows that humanity passed through a severe population bottleneck during this era, reduced to a few thousand breeding pairs. Agriculture appears suddenly across multiple regions shortly after 9600 BCE, as if knowledge had been injected into scattered groups who emerged from shelters with the seeds of new cultures. You begin to understand why the Hopi stories feel less like allegory and more like after-action reports. Yet it is the description of the Ant People themselves that forces the breath to hitch. The elders describe them not as insects, despite the name, but as tall, slender beings with grayish skin, elongated skulls, and enormous wraparound eyes that glinted like obsidian. Their mouths were small, almost vestigial. They communicated partly with sound, partly without it. And when modern Hopi elders are shown images of gray aliens, the archetype that dominates abduction reports today, they quietly nod. Yes, they say, that is them, but taller, kinder. This is the moment where the world seems to tilt. You realize the Hopi are not describing extraterrestrials through the lens of modern UFO culture. They are describing what their ancestors claimed to have seen long before written history existed, long before movies or folklore contamination, long before an artist ever drew a gray on a magazine cover, and the parallels keep unraveling. The Hopi say the Ant People traveled inside a reed that grew upward into the sky, a phrase anthropologists once assumed metaphorical, until hollow reeds in the American Southwest were found to contain silica fibers strong enough to withstand pressure when woven into large structures. the same structural principle used in early aerospace composites. They describe the ant people's descent into the sky as sounding like wind and thunder. They describe receiving seeds and knowledge directly from their hands. They describe star alignments on sacred tablets marking the times of previous destructions. Then comes the detail that should not exist. Some clans claim the ant people left physical artifacts, green-blue spiral stones that ring like metal when struck, tablets forged from an alloy harder than iron, objects not meant for human hands. In 2013, an elder allowed one such artifact to be filmed, a metallic piece that resisted cutting, even with diamond tools. Metallurgical analyses conducted quietly, not in journals, but in laboratories willing to avoid the backlash, indicated a copper aluminum iron alloy with a structure inconsistent with any known pre-industrial method. You can choose to wave this away. Many do, but it becomes harder when placed beside rock art, flood layers, astronomical alignments, and genetic timelines that all whisper the same suggestion. Someone helped humanity survive the collapse that almost erased it. Someone who did not look like us. Someone who lived beneath the earth or came from above it. Someone who taught, sheltered, and watched. The Hopi say the ant people will return when the world stands at the edge of another transition. Not as destroyers, not necessarily as saviors, but as witnesses to see whether humanity has learned anything since the last time the sky opened. And as strange as it sounds, you begin to wonder whether these memories were not meant for the past at all. Perhaps they are warnings for the future. If the Hopi stories feel like a memory preserved through survival, then the Dogon accounts feel like a memory preserved through obsession. Precise, technical, guarded for centuries by a people who had no reason to invent astronomy and every reason to protect what they believed had been given to them. Their homeland lies in the parched cliffs of Mali, where villages cling to sandstone walls like nests built against time itself. And it is here, among these ancient terraces, that the story of the Nommo begins. Beings who emerged from a steel roaring ark that descended in fire and water, bringing knowledge far beyond anything a pre-metal society should understand. The Dogon are quiet people. Their rituals are sparse, deliberate, and often hidden from outsiders. Yet once every 50 years, the entire culture revolves around a single event, the Sugoi ceremony. It marks the completion of an orbit one they claim belongs not to Earth, not to the moon, but to a tiny star that circles Sirius, the brightest star in our sky. They call this dim companion Tolo, the seed star, the heaviest object in the heavens. For centuries, dogmatic scholars dismissed this as poetic metaphor, a star too small to see, too dense to imagine, a 50-year orbit, impossible. But then the telescopes came. In 1862, astronomers confirmed the existence of Sirius B, a white dwarf so dense that a teaspoon of its matter weighs tons. In the 1920s, they calculated its orbital period 50 years, exactly as the Dogon had said, and in 1970, the first photographs proved its existence. Suddenly, the question shifted from how could the Dogon be wrong, to how could they possibly have known, because the Dogon knew more than just the orbit. They claimed Potolo was small, heavy, and white. They described its elliptical path with a precision that matches modern astronomical models. They placed Sirius A at the focal point of the ellipse. Some elders even described a third star, Sirius C, which astronomers denied until subtle gravitational irregularities recorded in the 1990s hinted at exactly such a body. These are not details one invents by gazing at the night sky. These are details that require mathematics, telescopes, and instruments the Dogon have never possessed. So where did the knowledge come from? According to the Dogon themselves, the answer is simple. The Nommo told them. The Nommo were described as amphibious beings, part human, part fish, who descended in a vehicle that rotated like a spiral seed pod being drilled into the earth. Their ship roared, shook the ground, and expelled water as if it had risen from an ocean in the sky. When it landed, the earth scorched beneath it. The Dogon still draw diagrams showing how it spun, how it tilted, how it stabilized. These are not myths, they are schematics. The Nommo taught the Dogon the structure of the cosmos, how stars are born, how they die, and how they move. They taught metallurgy, agriculture, weaving, and the organization of clan systems. Most disturbingly, they taught that humans had once been incomplete, and that after a great cosmic disruption, the Nommo had repaired them, a statement that sounds uncomfortably like early descriptions of genetic modification. Anthropologists Marcel Grial, V. Germain Dieterlen lived among the Dogon for over 20 years, recording thousands of pages of testimony. At first, they believed they had discovered a symbolic cosmology, but the longer they stayed, the more technical the information became. Grial wrote that the Dogon priests produced diagrams identical to modern astrophysical charts, including density, descriptions that no known ancient culture should possess. Skeptics immediately tried to discredit the findings. They claimed contamination. Perhaps a traveler had mentioned Sirius B. Perhaps the Dogon had misheard a missionary. Perhaps the story was exaggerated. But the Dogon priests insisted that the knowledge came from the innermost levels of their initiation system, levels never described to outsiders. And multiple ethnographies arriving decades later, Long after Grial's deaths also recorded Dogon elders who had never met a European, never seen a telescope, and yet recited the same details of the Sirius system. Something is wrong with the official explanation, and the pattern only becomes stranger. The Dogons say the Nommo's ship was made of a material that vibrated and sang. When it descended, it created a hollow in the world, a cavity in space that allowed instantaneous travel. To a modern physicist, this description matches the conceptual foundation of the Alcubierre warp metric, a model for faster-than-light travel that involves contracting space in front of a vessel and expanding it behind. The Dogons say the Nommo did exactly that, not in theory, but in history. Even more unsettling is how the Dogon draw the Nommo with elongated bodies, large eyes, webbed limbs, and skin that glistens like oil. They say the Nommo needed water to live, and that they built their first sanctuary in a reservoir carved into the cliff. To this day, rituals involving water and amphibious symbolism are considered sacred remnants of their presence. But the Dogon are not alone. The Bozo people nearby describe the same star system, the same invisible heavy star, the same amphibious beings. The Bambara draw the Sirius triad as concentric circles exactly matching astronomical maps. All of them claim the knowledge was given, not discovered. And here is where the story hits its breaking point. When researchers asked Dogon priests to draw the Sirius system in sand, they produced the elliptical orbits with remarkable accuracy. They indicated the correct ratio of masses. They placed Sirius A exactly where modern science places it. They described Potolo as smaller than a grain of millet, but heavier than all things. A poetic phrasing that mirrors the mind-bending density of a white dwarf. This is not coincidence. This is not cultural diffusion. This is data. Data preserved for a reason. What the Dogon are truly saying is that someone once came here, someone who understood astronomy at a level unreachable by ancient cultures, someone who had the technology to descend from the sky in a spinning craft, someone who lived in water but walked on land, someone who taught them how the universe works and promised to return during a future cycle. The Sugoi ceremony, held every 50 years, marks not just the orbit of Sirius B, but the return of memory. When the masked dancers move in slow spirals, imitating the sky's hidden star, they are not reenacting mythology, they are reenacting an arrival. And the quiet implication, the one whispered among elders but rarely said aloud, is this: the Nommo have not finished watching, whether they came from Sirius, another dimension, or a civilization lost to time. Their fingerprint remains etched across the Dogon world, so meticulously preserved that even modern science struggles to keep up. And as the sky cycles again, as the 50-year orbit completes once more, the question becomes unavoidable: were the Nommo merely visitors, or were they guardians waiting for the moment humanity would finally understand what they left behind? If the Dogon preserve the most technical memory, then the people of Australia's Kimberley region preserve the oldest. Their land holds stories that predate the pyramids, predate agriculture, predate the end of the last ice age. And in those stories, painted across cliff walls, tucked into secret caves, whispered through generations, peers, a group of visitors unlike any the world has ever recorded. The Wandjina, the cloud beings with eyes too large, faces too pale, and halos too radiant to belong to humans. To see them, you must travel to places where the earth still remembers its first dawn. But Kimberley is ancient geologically, spiritually, atmospherically ancient. The cliffs glow red and gold under the sun. Rivers carve paths through stone that has not shifted since megafauna roamed the continent. In these rock shelters, sometimes hidden behind waterfalls or accessible only at low tide, the Wandjina wait in silence. They do not fade, they do not erode. Because every rainy season, the Aboriginal custodians repaint them with reverence, so precise it borders on ritual engineering. The faces are unmistakable. Large, round, smooth, eyes oval and black, consuming most of the face. No mouth, no eyebrows. No expression except an eternal, unblinking watchfulness that reaches through millennia. Around each head, halos burst outward like stylized clouds or electromagnetic fields frozen in ochre. Their bodies, when depicted, are faint, sometimes barely outlined, melting into the rock, as though they were never meant to be fully physical. The absence of a mouth is particularly striking. In many Aboriginal traditions, the Wandjina did not speak with voices. Their communication was direct, immediate, internal. A detail that ancient artists never forgot. Yet this is only the surface. Elders say the Wandjina came when the land was soft, before rivers had carved their channels, before mountains had fully risen. They shaped the world with their hands. They brought law, order, seasons, rain. When their work was done, they pressed their faces into the stone, leaving behind living imprints, images that were not merely paintings but anchors, gateways, presences. This is why touching an unretouched Wandjina is taboo. The old energy stirs. Lightning, they say, will follow. For outside observers, these are beautiful myths. But the stone tells a story that refuses to remain mythical. In the 1990s and early 2000s, researchers began dating the underlying layers of Wandjina art by analyzing charcoal fragments trapped under mineral deposits. The results were staggering. Some images are at least 20,000 years old. Others, based on optically stimulated luminescence from wasp nests, may reach 40,000 to 50,000 years, making them older than every civilization on Earth. Older than agriculture, older even than many known Homo sapiens, and yet the style is identical across vast distances. The same eyes, the same halos, the same absence of mouths. For tens of thousands of years, across landscapes separated by rugged cliffs and seasonal floods, the art remained unchanged. Mainstream archaeology struggles to explain this coherence. Styles evolve, mythologies adapt, yet the Wandjina remain frozen in a consistency that feels less like cultural expression and more like preservation, as if the artists were not creating new images, but maintaining an old one carefully, precisely, as though fidelity mattered more than creativity. Then came the scans. High-resolution laser mapping revealed shapes beneath the visible paint figures, wearing segmented suits. Joint rings at the elbows and knees, backpack-like structures extending from the upper torso. Ultraviolet light, exposed halos composed of concentric rings, identical to electromagnetic interference patterns. Rock art physicist Jack Pettigrew, after examining these anomalies, cautiously suggested they resemble plasma discharge effects, the kind produced in high-energy laboratories. Effects no prehistoric culture could have invented. This is where the ground itself begins, whispering. Some clans keep what they call Wandjina stones, perfectly spherical objects, smooth as polished crystal, harder than any Kimberley rock. When struck, they ring with a clear bell tone. They do not scratch, they do not chip. Under microscopic analysis, some show crystalline structures like synthetic sapphire, which requires temperatures exceeding to 0 degrees Celsius to form. Such heat would melt almost every natural material in the region. Yet the elders insist these stones fell with the Wandjina when the sky opened. Holding one feels wrong. Not in the sense of danger, but in the sense of encountering something fundamentally out of place, like touching a fragment of a machine that should not exist in a world, without smelting furnaces or mineral forges. But the Wandjina story deepens still. According to tradition, the beings arrived in great clouds that shook the earth. The ground trembled, thunder roared, the sea boiled. The imagery sounds mythical, but volcanology and atmospheric physics suggest something else. A description of a craft, whether natural or engineered, entering through dense atmosphere, with enough energy to ionize the air. They brought plants, elders say, seeds that have never grown there before. Modern genetic studies show certain yams and tubers in northern Australia are not native and likely originated in island Southeast Asia. Their presence in Australia during the late Pleistocene implies one of two things. Ancient maritime transport on a scale no current evidence supports, or delivery by an outside agent. Even the alignments whisper more. Some Wandjina sites feature stone arrangements that correspond to precessional star positions from 15,000 to 25,000 years ago. Alignments that no longer match today's skies, because the Earth's axis has shifted over tens of millennia. The only way to capture such positions is to build the markers when the alignments were correct, or to inherit knowledge from entities that understood the sky far better than early humans. When the wet season approaches each year, elders prepare to repaint the Wandjina. The ritual is done in absolute secrecy. Women and men of specific lineage carry the pigment, trace the shapes, revive the halos. Cameras are forbidden. Outsiders are dismissed, because the image must remain alive. It is not art, it is a covenant. The old people say that when the monsoon clouds gather, the Wandjina return briefly. In the roll of thunder and the sudden flash of lightning, in the moment when the first sheet of rain touches the parched earth, and they say something else too quietly, almost apologetically. The Wandjina never left. They simply stepped back into the sky and watched from the edges of storms. If the Hopi remember those who sheltered humanity underground, and the Dogon remember those who taught the stars, then the Wandjina represent another facet of the forgotten visitors, the ones who shaped the land itself, who left artifacts harder than iron, who carved their own faces into stone as a message to the future, a message that still stares at us with eyes that never blink. If the Wandjina feel ancient and ethereal, the next visitors are startlingly concrete, shrouded, not in cliff art or oral legends alone, but in tablets of fired clay, tens of thousands of them each, etched with the precision of accountants, astronomers, engineers, and kings. In the floodplains of ancient Sumer, where the Tigris and Euphrates braided themselves into fertile crescents, humanity did not evolve slowly into civilization. It detonated into it. Villages became cities almost overnight. Math appeared fully formed. Writing emerged not as pictographs but as a working administrative system. And standing behind all of it, according to the Sumerians themselves, were the Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came. To grasp the anomaly, imagine life around 6,500 BCE, in what archaeologists call the Obadi period. Small settlements, simple pottery, no monumental architecture, no writing. Then, around 3,800 BCE, a new era erupts, the Uruk period. Suddenly multi-story temples rise. Urban planning takes shape. Labor becomes organized, specialized. The earliest known writing system, cuneiform, appears as a completed tool for recording taxes, inventories, star positions, and king lists. No precursors, no español status. It is as if someone handed humanity an entire civilization starter kit and said, "Here, use this." The Sumerians were explicit about the source. They did not invent it, they were taught. Clay tablets describe the moment the Anunnaki descended in sky chambers that roared with flame, shaking the ground as they landed on platforms prepared for them. The beings stepped out wearing gleaming garments, often depicted as layered, ribbed suits. On their heads sat the distinctive horn crowns, not symbolic diadems, but, according to some interpretations, devices that measured celestial positions. The tablets described them as tall, radiant, and long-lived, and they came with purpose. They organized irrigation systems, assigning humans tasks with almost military precision. They established kingship as an institution, placing the first rulers on thrones with the explicit instruction that their authority descended from the heavens. They taught writing so that human scribes could record decrees, harvests, star movements, and omens. And they insisted that humanity remember who gave them this knowledge. But the tablets contained something even more extraordinary. Sumerian astronomers recorded the complete solar system, including Uranus and Neptune millennia before the invention of telescopes. They described Uranus as a green-blue wandering star and Neptune as a deep blue body of the outer sea. They noted that a faint, distant object, what we now call Pluto, may once have belonged to Saturn before being displaced. Modern astrophysics suggests such a scenario is not impossible. One tablet lists orbital periods for outer planets with astonishing accuracy. Another describes the precession of the equinoxes, a slow wobble of Earth's axis that takes 25,772 years to complete, long before Greek astronomers discovered it. This is not folklore. This is data, written in wedge-shaped marks, baked into clay, that was buried for 4,000 years. Then, there's the Sumerian king list, carved into the weld Blundell prism. It states calmly that before the Great Flood, kings ruled for tens of thousands of years, Ululim for 28,800 years, Alanger for 36,000, and so on, 8 kings ruling for a combined 241,200 years. Scholars usually call this symbolic exaggeration, but the list also records that after the flood, reign lengths dropped suddenly to normal human spans, a pattern that mimics other global flood narratives, including the dramatic environmental shifts at the end of the last ice age. The Anunnaki's architectural fingerprints remain visible in the ruins of Sumer. Every major city, Uruk-Nippur, was built around a ziggurat, a towering temple whose name in Sumerian, E-Temen-Ki, meant house of the foundation of heaven and earth. The very top platform was called the Gig Parku, the shining place, often interpreted as a landing platform. It was broad, flat, reinforced with bitumen, and in some cases exhibits vitrification stone melted into glass-like surfaces, requiring temperatures exceeding 200 degrees Celsius. No ancient kill could achieve this, but a craft landing repeatedly on a platform could. Even the Sumerian math system seems engineered rather than evolved. Their basic ST framework's hexadecimal notation allows astonishing computational shortcuts, easy fractions, elegant geometry, simple representation of astronomical cycles. Tablet Plimpton 322, dated to around 1800 BCE, but likely copied from older Sumerian masters. Contains Pythagorean triples accurate to 6 decimal places. This is not the work of a culture fumbling with early mathematics. It is the work of a culture taught by someone who understood it thoroughly. When cultures rose and fell, Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians, they kept the same gods, changing only the names. Marduk, Enki, Enlil. Beneath the titles lay the same story. The gods were physical, they descended, they instructed, they departed, and one day they would return. But perhaps the most telling clue lies not in the cities or tablets, but in the suddenness of everything. Civilization does not emerge like lightning. It takes millennia of slow experimentation. Yet in Sumer, it appeared like a switch being flipped. Agriculture scaled, writing emerged, law codified, astronomy systematized, metallurgy advanced, architecture standardized. Mainstream explanations invoke diffusion, competition, gradual innovation, but the timeline is merciless. One moment, clay pots and barley. The next, mathematics, literature, timekeeping, and monumental construction. No ramp, no transition, just ignition. Which brings us back to the Anunnaki. The Sumerians meant the name literally. Those who from heaven to earth came, not in spirit, not in dreams, in vessels. They left the world with tools it should not have had. They left it with kingship that still shapes our politics. They left it with a calendar system still embedded in our clocks. And they left, according to the tablets, with a promise to watch. Some believed they ascended through the stars. Some believed they withdrew into hidden realms. Some believed they would return when the world realigned with the heavens. But the truth lingers in clay and stone. Something intervened. Something massive. Something intelligent. Something that pushed humanity onto a trajectory it never should have reached on its own. And in the quiet between the lines, in the ancient wedge-shaped marks scratched by trembling hands, another whisper emerges. They came before, they left once. They may not be done. Long before the Aztecs marched across the Valley of Mexico, before the Maya carved dynasties into limestone, before the Inca traced their empire along the spine of the Andes, the Americas were already telling the same story, the old world whispered, pale teachers descending from the sky, bearing knowledge, reshaping cities, and then disappearing with a promise to return. The names changed: Quetzalcoatl, Kukulkan, Viracocha, but the pattern refused to break. Everywhere the feathered serpent appeared, civilization rose like a sudden flame. The descriptions are astonishingly consistent. A tall figure, pale or golden-skinned, bearded, something genetically rare among indigenous Americans. Wearing long robes, carrying a staff or a bag of knowledge. Gentle, opposed to blood sacrifice. Arriving from the east across the sea or descending in a shining serpent that moved without paddles. Smoke curling from its body like scales made of fire. He taught astronomy, calendar cycles, agriculture, writing, architecture, and then he left, promising to return in an age when the sun reset and the world turned over. When Hernan Court stepped ashore in 1519 clad in metal that glinted like the sun, riding animals the Mexica had never seen, Emperor Moctezuma froze, not from fear but from recognition. The year matched the prophecy cycle, the direction matched, the description matched, and so, fatally, he believed Quetzalcoatl had returned. This was not Navit. It was the power of memory preserved through stone, ritual, and myth. Travel east to the Yucatan, and you find Chichen Itza, the city of the serpent. At its heart stands El Castillo, the pyramid of Kukulkan. To the untrained eye, it is a symmetrical marvel, but to those who watch it during the equinox, it becomes something else entirely. In the last hour before sunset, the northwest corner casts a series of angular shadows that undulate like the body of a serpent, descending the staircase step by step until it connects with a carved stone serpent head at the base. This spectacle lasts exactly 3 hours and 22 minutes. To engineer it, the pyramid needed to be aligned to within a fraction of a degree of true north. Its steps had to follow a precise slope and proportion. The builders would need not just mathematics but an understanding of the sun's declination, atmospheric distortion, and the geometry of shadow over time. And yet the Maya left no record of trial and error. They built it right on the first attempt. Their calendar, the long count, was equally astonishing, a system so accurate it tracked Venus cycles too within 1 day every 500 years. Their Catan cycles followed astronomical alignments rather than agricultural ones. Their reckoning of cosmic time stretched back to 3114 BCE and forward 2 ages long after ours. How did a culture without metal tools or beasts of burden calculate celestial mechanics with the precision of Renaissance astronomers? They told us exactly how. It was taught to them. Move west to the Mexican highlands and you reach Teotihuacan, a city so old that even the Aztecs, who found it abandoned, named it the place where gods were born. The layout of the city is not random. It is an astronomical diagram, a scale model of the solar system as seen from above. The sun pyramid marks the sun, the moon pyramid marks the moon. The distances along the Avenue of the Dead correlate to planetary orbital ratios, and the final marker points directly at the Pleiades, the star cluster associated with world renewal myths across cultures. Beneath the sun pyramid lies something stranger, a man-made cavern coated with thick mica sheets. Mica is a radiation insulator. The nearest natural mica source is 3,000 kilometers away in Brazil. The question mainstream archaeology quietly avoids is simple. Why would a pre-metal culture haul tons of a radiation shield across a continent to bury it under a pyramid, unless the builders were imitating something, structures built to house objects or beings that needed insulation from high-energy fields? Even the legends match this implication. The Teotihuacanos spoke of serpents of fire, of beings descending in radiant shells, of knowledge granted in exchange for ritual stewardship. And when they left, the city fell silent. Further south, in the Andean highlands, myth becomes even sharper. The Inca called their teacher Viracocha, the wandering creator. He emerged from Lake Titicaca after a great flood that wiped away a previous world. He was described as light-skinned, tall, bearded, wearing a flowing robe. He taught the first survivors agriculture, medicine, stonework, astronomy. Then he walked across the Pacific on the water itself, promising his sons in the sky would return when the world reached another turning. To the Inca, Viracocha was not a god in the abstract sense. He was a person, with height, clothing, voice, stride, someone real. If these were isolated myths, perhaps they could be dismissed. But the stonework that surrounds Viracocha's footsteps refuses to be ignored. At Teotihuacan megaliths weigh dozens of tons. At Chavin, feline and serpent motifs echo cosmic themes. At Ollantaytambo, walls interlock with perfection so exact that a sheet of paper cannot slip between them. Across a hemisphere, cultures with no boats large enough to cross oceans, and no metals strong enough to carve granite describe the same visitors and build structures that speak the same mathematical language. Even the Nazca Line's kilometers-long geoglyphs, visible only from the air, feel like messages addressed to the sky, not the ground. One figure even wears what looks like a helmet and suit, arm raised in a gesture eerily reminiscent of greeting. And threaded through all of it is the same narrative rhythm, the same promise. They came from the east. They taught, they left by sky or by sea. They will return when the calendar turns. Everywhere the serpent appears feathered or fiery, civilization blooms like a sudden awakening. Everywhere the pale teacher walks, architecture leaps. Astronomy sharpens. Writing emerges. It is almost as if the Americas remember the same visitors the old world does, only filtered through different landscapes, different languages, different sky-watching traditions. The faces change, the serpents change. But the blueprint does not. And when you see the equinox serpent descend the pyramid, when you stand beneath the shadow of a city built as a celestial map, when you hear Maya elders speak of cycles ending and dawns beginning, you feel a strange recognition rising from somewhere deeper than memory. A sense that these were not myths but instructions, reminders, echoes of teachers who shaped continents and then vanished, leaving the stones to testify in their place. If Mesoamerica feels like a coded memory written in calendars and serpents, the Andes feel like an open secret carved directly into stone, a secret so precise, so technically impossible, that even modern engineers blanch when they see it. In the high thin air near Lake Titicaca, where oxygen fades and the sky sharpens into a blade of blue, lie the ruins of Tiwanaku and Pumapunku. They are not monumental in size alone. They are monumental in precision, in impossibility. In the quiet way they imply that someone once understood matter itself differently than we do. The Inca, who ruled centuries later, never claimed these sites. They said plainly, we did not build them. They were here before us. They attributed the works to Viracocha, the pale, bearded teacher who emerged from Lake Titicaca after a world-ending flood, created new humans from stone, taught them agriculture, astronomy, medicine, and stone cutting, as if the mountain were soft clay, and then walked west across the Pacific, promising to return with his skyborn companions. Most myths exaggerate. This one underestimates, because whatever Viracocha's people were, they did not leave behind myth, they left behind engineering. Begin with the H-blocks of Pumapunku. Each weighs several tons. Each contains interior angles cut to 90 degrees, with tolerances of less than a millimeter. Some blocks have drill holes whose internal grooves spiral exactly like a modern tungsten carbide bit, rotating at 2000 RPM. Others have recessed channels so perfectly parallel that laser scanners cannot detect measurable deviation. Bronze chisels, the best tools available in the region, cannot cut andesite at all. Not slowly, not imperfectly, not ever. In 2018, a University of Pennsylvania team attempted to recreate a single H-block using only Bronze Age tools. After 6 months, they gave up. The chisels shattered. The angles were impossible. The control tolerances required machinery, a kind of machinery no ancient culture is supposed to have possessed. And yet the stones sit there, mute but defiant. Then there is Tiwanaku's sun gate, carved from a single 10-ton andesite slab, 17,000 years ago, long before the Inca, before the Maya, before Sumer, before agriculture. A time when glaciers still clung to continents and human population hovered near extinction after the Younger Dryas catastrophe. Yet someone in that era not only understood precession, but carved it into stone with mathematical clarity. The local Aymara people say Viracocha returned after that flood, during the darkness that followed. He taught survivors how to rebuild, how to plant crops, how to measure the heavens for the next cycle. And then, when the world stabilized, he left walking across the water until he vanished on the western horizon. If the story sounds familiar, it should. A pale teacher emerging after a cataclysm, a world reset, agriculture gifted, not discovered, architecture taught, not invented, a promise to return. The pattern stretches across continents like a constellation, yet the Andean story adds something the others do not. The technology of the stones themselves. At multiple sites, including Sacsayhuaman, Ollantaytambo, and Machu Picchu, walls are built from massive polygonal blocks, some weighing 100 tons or more, that interlock so tightly that a razor blade cannot slide between them. The blocks curve, bevel, and lock as though they were cast in molds. Except stone cannot be cast, not by humans at least. Some blocks bear small protruding nubs called tired stones in Quechua that resemble lifting lugs, as if designed for gripping arms or levitation tools. Local legends say the stones were sung into place, lifted by vibrations. An absurd idea until you stand before a 100-ton block perched perfectly on a narrow ledge halfway up a mountain. More unsettling are the metal clamp spy-shaped keys poured into grooves between stones. Metallurgical analysis shows they are made from a copper-nickel alloy, requiring temperatures over 100 degrees Celsius. No, ancient Andean culture used forced draft furnaces. The Inca themselves said these were relics from the older ones, the builders before the flood. And then there are the engraved andesite stones discovered in the 20th century, thousands of them showing scenes that defy chronology, telescopes observing planets, surgeons performing heart transplants, humans riding what appear to be dinosaurs. Many archaeologists dismiss them as hoaxes. Yet oxidization within the grooves indicates genuine age, in some cases centuries or more, and no two stones repeat their motifs, as would be expected of mass-produced fakes. But perhaps the most difficult artifact to dismiss is Viracocha's timeline. A worldwide flood, survivors sheltering in highlands, a pale teacher emerging afterward, a rebirth of agriculture and knowledge, a promise that his skyborn companions would one day return. The story aligns uncannily with the end of the Younger Dryas when glaciers collapsed, sea levels rose 120 meters, and genetic bottlenecks suggest human population crashed to dangerous lows. If a prior civilization existed, global, coastal, technologically advanced Sea ruins would now lie underwater, and its refugees would have fled to high ground, where they might be remembered as gods. But the Andean traditions describe something beyond that. Beings whose knowledge exceeded even the hypothetical lost civilizations. The same beings remembered as Anunnaki in Sumer, Ant People in Hopi lore, Nommo among the Dogon, Wandjina in Australia. It is as if each region saw a different aspect of the same visitors, astronomers, geneticists, stoneworkers, each teaching a fragment of a forgotten whole. Standing on the altiplano, wind cutting through the ruins, you feel the weight of that possibility. The stones hum with a silence that is not absence but intention. They feel left behind, like tools no longer needed, or messages waiting for a reader who finally understands. And in the villages around Titicaca, elders still say the same words, whispered by Hopi elders, Dogon priests, and Aboriginal custodians. The world is cycling again. The signs are appearing. The ones who taught us will return when the fifth sun rises. If so, the stones may not be ruins at all. They may be invitations. By the time you gather the Hopi memories, the Dogon diagrams, the Wandjina faces, the Sumerian tablets, the Maya calendars, and the Andean stonework, something begins to shift quietly, uncomfortably beneath the foundations of accepted history. These cultures never met. They were separated by oceans, deserts, and tens of thousands of years. They spoke unrelated languages, worshipped different gods, carved in different styles, built with different tools. Yet across every barrier geography could impose, across every gulf time could widen, they remembered the same story. Not similar stories, the same story. Beings from the sky, arrivals in fire, cloud, or thunder. Tall figures with large heads or luminous faces. Knowledge delivered, not discovered. Agriculture bestowed. Astronomy explained. Architecture demonstrated. A warning given. A promise to return. And everywhere stone, clay, pigment, myth, ritual, the memory remains. That is the pattern mainstream archaeology tries, again and again, to dissolve. It leans onto familiar explanations, archetypes, and convergence. Archetypes say humans, no matter where they live. Imagine the same symbols, sky fathers, wise elders, civilizing heroes, because the psyche generates universal narratives. Convergence says groups facing similar challenges will invent similar solutions and myths independently, useful ideas, elegant even. But the moment you scrutinize the details, they break. Archetypes don't teach the 50-year orbit of a white dwarf star invisible to the naked eye. Archetypes don't encode the 25,772-year precessional cycle in stone. Archetypes don't require advanced metallurgy at 100 degrees Celsius in pre-metal cultures. Archetypes don't show beings in pressure suits with hoses, seals, and helmets. Archetypes don't leave drill holes with spiral grooves consistent across continents. Cultural convergence doesn't explain identical sky beings with large heads and oval eyes in regions that never interacted. It doesn't explain the same promise to return. It doesn't explain the same flood timeline. It doesn't explain the same agricultural jump around 9600 BCE. It doesn't explain the global memory of a world ending by fire and water, and teachers emerging afterward. At a certain point, coincidence stops being coincidence. It becomes resistance and inability to let the evidence say what it's trying to say. Because the truth is that every culture seems to be describing a single, global intervention. A moment or a series of moments when someone stepped into human history and left fingerprints and myth, stone, and DNA. And this is where the narrative branches into three great hypotheses. The first is the lost civilization model, a technologically advanced culture flourishing during the Ice Age, coastal, global in scope, wiped out by the Younger Dryas catastrophe. Its survivors bearded, pale, knowledgeable, receding humanity across continents, earning mythic status as gods. This explains the sudden appearance of agriculture, monumental stone architecture, and mathematics. It explains Viracocha Quetzalcoatl Kukulkan. It explains why Göbekli Tepe blooms fully formed around 9600 BCE, but it struggles with the Dogon's Sirius knowledge, the Wandjina plasma halos, and the Anunnaki's planetary data. The second is the extraterrestrial hypothesis. Off-world visitors observing Earth, intervening periodically, teaching, adjusting, correcting, and leaving. This explains the pressure suits, the depictions of craft, the global consistency of morphological large eyes, elongated heads, luminous faces, and the recurring theme of telepathic communication. It explains the 50-year orbital mastery, the precessional data, and the sudden leaps in human capability. But it raises a deeper question. Why us? Why then? Why so much? And then silence. The third is the interdimensional hypothesis. Beings not from another star system but another layer of reality, stepping sideways rather than downward, crossing between frequencies rather than space. Shamans worldwide speak of these realms. Quantum physics permits higher dimensions curled into the fabric of space-time. Indigenous stories often describe beings who appear and vanish not through travel but through shift. The Hopi say the ant people emerged from the ground as if peeling through a curtain. The Wandjina appear in storms as if from thin air. The Nommo's ship created a hollow in the world, a cavity in space itself. This hypothesis explains their sudden arrivals and departures, the way they interact with consciousness, and the feeling persistent across cultures that these beings are simultaneously physical and something more. But even this doesn't cover everything, which leads to a possibility scholars fear more than any other, that all three hypotheses may be true at once. A lost human civilization, uplifted or repaired by off-world or interdimensional mentors. These mentors working through cycles, reappearing after catastrophes, seeding knowledge in eras when humanity was ready, withdrawing when humanity strayed, and leaving stories designed not to explain the past but to prepare the future. And that brings us to the most unsettling part of the pattern. It is not in the myths. It is not in the stones. It is in the timing. Around 12,800 years ago, something struck the Earth, a comet airburst. According to sediment layers on 4 continents, the climate collapsed. Megafauna died. Sea levels rose 120 meters. Humanity nearly vanished. Then, around 9,600 BCE, civilization rebooted. Agriculture, astronomy, stonework, suddenly, globally. Now look at the present. The Hopi say the fourth world is ending. The Dogon say the Segui cycle closes. The Maya say the fifth sun has begun. The Amara say Viracocha suns return when the world forgets its law. The Aboriginal custodians say the Wandjina stir when the land heats and the clouds change. And elders across cultures point to the sky and say quietly, the signs are complete. We are the first generation capable of seeing the whole pattern at once. Drones scanning ruins. Satellites mapping, coastlines lost to ice melt, carbon dating pushing timelines backward. DNA revealing ancient bottlenecks, astronomers confirming impact layers, physicists seeing what shamans hinted at for millennia. The myths never changed. We simply became capable of hearing them. And when you look at the pattern fully assembled, a realization settled slowly, deeply, like a long-forgotten memory resurfacing. Something happened. Something global. Something intelligent. Something that never truly left. And the sky, if the elders are right, may be preparing to open again. If every continent remembers visitors who arrived in fire, cloud, thunder, or silence, if every ancient leap in human knowledge appears less like invention and more like instruction, and if every surviving elder tradition insists that these teachers departed with a promise to return, then the final question is no longer whether something happened, but when it will happen again. For thousands of years, civilizations encoded their warnings in stone calendars, prophecy tablets, solstice alignments, star counts, eclipse cycles, and mythic chronologies that scholars dismissed as poetry. But hidden beneath the metaphor, the numbers converge. The Hopi say humanity has passed through 3 destroyed worlds and now stands at the end of the 4th. The transition is not subtle fire, flood, upheaval, a thinning of the veil. They say the next world begins when the sky is disturbed and the old teachers step through again. The Dogon say the Segui cycle reflects more than astronomy. It marks the return of memory, the moment when the Nommo, the amphibious visitors from Sirius, rise again from the water and descend from the sky. The Maya say the calendar is not linear, but rhythmic, world ages turning like gears. The dawn of the 5th sun is not an apocalypse, but an audit. The Aymara say Viracocha's children return when the stones speak again and the sky changes color. The Aboriginal custodians say the Wandjina reappear when the land is too warm and the clouds forget their shapes. And across the world, in 2025, elders began quietly saying the same thing. The signs are complete. Not metaphorical symbols, but environmental, astronomical, psychological, and cultural thresholds that align with ancient cycles more precisely than chance should allow. Sea levels rising, the echo of the post-Jungle Dryas floods. Wildfires raging, the memory of the world destroyed by fire. A digital sky glowing with artificial stars, satellites forming patterns humanity has never seen before. Solar storms intensifying, comets brightening, magnetic fields shifting, humanity fragmenting. And beneath it all, a global sense, quiet but growing, that something is watching again. Not malevolently, not with judgment, but with recognition, as if checking whether the species it once taught is ready for the next chapter. Because this is the twist buried inside every tradition, from Sumer to the Amazon to the Kimberley Cliffs. The teachers never left the sky. They simply stopped showing themselves in daylight. They withdrew, but not out of abandonment, out of expectation, out of the belief that humans needed to grow on their own, fail on their own, rise on their own, remember on their own. The stories were not warnings of doom. They were instructions for maturity, civilizational rites of passage. Every leap humanity has made to agriculture, mathematics, writing, navigation, architecture, physics feels less like evolution and more like exams. Chapters left open for us to finish. Evidence scattered like breadcrumbs leading toward a destination we have not yet reached. And now we stand at the edge again. The ruins are no longer silent. The myths are no longer distant. The sky is no longer empty. For the first time in history, we have the tools to notice what our ancestors saw with naked eyes and encoded in stone. Drones scan megaliths, satellites map submerged cities, geophysicists find heat signatures inside pyramids, astronomers detect interstellar objects with trajectories too clean to be accidental, geneticists uncover ancient bottlenecks that match everything the elders described, and physicists, once allergic to myth, now grapple openly with higher dimensions. Wormholes, warp metrics, the very mechanisms ancient stories hinted at when they spoke of ladders of lightning, spinning arcs, and thunderous descents. We are living in the first era capable of understanding what the ancient world was trying to tell us. And if the elders are right, if the cycles truly aligned, then we may also be the first era in thousands of years to witness what happens when the sky opens again. Now, the pace softens. The narration exhales. The world slows, as if preparing. Look up at the night sky not with wonder, but with familiarity. Our ancestors stood beneath this same dome of stars, feeling a presence they could not name but refused to forget. They carved their memories into mountains, painted their teachers on cave walls, aligned their temples to the heavens, and whispered to their children, remember, one day they will return. Maybe the return will not be a ship. Maybe it will not be a descent at all. Maybe it will be a recognition, a shift in understanding as humanity steps into a scale it was always meant to reach. Civilizations rise and fall. Worlds end and begin. But the pattern endures because the pattern is not about destruction, nor salvation, nor conquest. It is about continuity, education, stewardship, a long experiment in consciousness, conducted not by absent gods but by present, watchers, patient, distant, waiting. The Hopi call them Ant People. The Dogon call them Nommo. The Aboriginal custodians call them Wandjina. The Maya call them Kukulkan. The Inca call them Viracocha. The Sumerians call them Anunnaki. Different names, different faces, same signature. And if the sky opens again, it will not be to judge us. It will be to see what kind of students we became. So breathe. Listen, the world is changing its cadence. The cycles are turning. The old stories are stirring, not as warnings, but as reminders. And somewhere above us or beside us, or beneath the thin veil of dimensions we barely comprehend, the teachers wait. Not to save us, not to rule us, but to witness what we choose to become when the lesson finally continues.